There are so many choices for plastic worms on the market. How do we know which one to use for what conditions? Well, today I want to talk about plastic worms. There are thousands of variations on the market, and I remember digging around in my grandfather's tackle box and seeing all kinds of the old cream scoundrels, the pre-rigged plastic worms, or maybe some man's jelly worms. They have been around for a long, long time, and they catch fish. Well, pretty much every soft plastics manufacturer in the marketplace has not only some sort of plastic worm, they have many variations of plastic worms, and certain worms do best under certain conditions, and that's what I really want to kind of dissect and break down today. So I'm going to split them into two categories. I've got your action style of worms, and then your more subtle style of worms. Now I could say power and finesse, but that's not 100% accurate because there are some subtle styles of worms that can be used on power types of presentations and rigs. So that's why I split it down into action and subtle. So let's go ahead and start with the action types of worms. These are going to be your worms that have your ribbon tails, your cutter tails, your thumper tails. These types of worms do best when we as an angler impart action to them. We may swim them through the water column, or if we're fishing them on the bottom, we're hopping them or dragging them right along. We are moving them. We're imparting action as an angler to get those action type tails to move, to get that ribbon tail to spin, to go ahead and get that cutter tail to flop back and forth, or for that thumper tail to create vibrations in the water column. These types of worms do an excellent job not only visually, but they also activate the lateral line on the bass. So what are the conditions that I might use for these action styles of worms? Well, one, the water might be stained, it might be really dirty water, and it probably has some sort of really thick cover to it, whether it's matted vegetation or brush piles. That is when I'm going to pull out a worm that's got a ribbon tail or a cutter tail or a thumper style of tail to it. I want as much vibration as possible, because in those types of conditions, the bass may not always see it, but they can definitely sense that it is there. I will also go with a larger action style worm when I'm trying to get some bigger bites. Maybe I go out on the water and I'm thinking, you know what, I may only get 6 or 7 bites today, but they're going to be 6 or 7 good bites. I will go with that style of worm, a little bit larger, maybe a great big bullworm like this with a thumper style of a tail to it. And I'll probably use some bold colors. This is where your June bugs and your plums do an excellent job with this style of worm. They're really good for that. And then the other thing I think about, do I need to locate some fish? Do I need to search for some fish? If that is the case, I'm going to use an action style of a tail for that situation, because I can cover a lot of water with it. I don't have a worm where I just need to soak it in one spot for a long time. I can cover water, swim those lures, and locate where those fish might be at. Now let's talk about the subtle style of worm, or what many people call finesse worms. This includes your things like your stick baits, your Senko style baits, your small finesse worms, your French fries, your do-nothing worms, all of those. Now when am I going to use that type of a lure? Well, one, if I've got a high pressure day, bluebird skies, and it's just tough fishing, I'll go with that style of worm. If I feel that the food chain is down on the bottom of the lake or riverbed and I'm targeting those bottom few inches, those are excellent choices in that situation. And if I've got ultra clear water, or even water that's slightly stained, I'll probably go with that style of worm, because I know that the bass in that area are keyed in on more with their sight than they are with their lateral line. So if I have a cleaner bottom, I don't have a lot of thick vegetation, I don't have a lot of wood and brush, and it's just more of an open type of a situation, maybe a lot of your highland reservoirs that are just rock, I will probably use a more subtle style of worm in some sort of natural colors. Now, another big difference of when I would choose an action or searching worm or a subtle style of worm is if I've got a really high percentage area. If I know that these bass are right here, and I want to let a worm soak and just sit there and sit there and sit there and entice them to bite, especially on these tough days, I'm going to go with a more subtle style of worm. I know that that Ned rig worm is working for me all the time. I can just leave it soak and soak and soak and soak and soak, and those bass, they can see it, they'll come up to it, they investigate it, it looks natural, it looks real, it can entice bites. And as far as bites, if there's a day I head on the water and I'm thinking, I'm not, necessarily concerned with landing a bunch of 5, 6, 7 pounders, I'm just going out today, I want to catch fish and get as many bites as possible, well, I'm probably going with this style of worm as well. Or if I have somebody with me in the boat that doesn't have a lot of experience bass fishing, maybe they're a first-time angler, so important to get them bites. That's when I'll put on your Ned rigs and your drop shots and your shaky heads, those types of lures that just draw strikes and elicit strikes. When I'm in high percentage areas, I can let those worms soak and keep them down there in the strike zone for a long time. Now, I mentioned earlier that some of these more finesse style worms or subtle worms have some crossover into your power presentations. A 4-inch French fry do nothing worm does an excellent job on a Carolina rig. It's just a great Carolina rig bait. So that is why I don't categorize all these small worms as necessarily finesse styles. I mean, we've talked about in other videos power drop shot rigs, and we can use weighted wacky rigs and really fish them fast and move right along as well. And hey, don't forget, if you want to watch a video on how to get way more bites on plastic worms, go ahead and check this one out right here. And don't forget to go out and encourage someone today. You never know how you might just change their life forever. For the Bass Fishing Life, I'm your host, Steve Rogers.